Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So, for years now, whenever I do damage calculations, I compare them to a damage baseline. That baseline involved the assumption for target armor class, which you can see right here, which results in a 60% chance to hit, assuming our Warlock starts with a +3 Charisma modifier, then +4 at level 4, then +5 at level 8. And the idea is they cast Hex, and they use Eldritch Blast, and they use Agonizing Blast. And I should explain why I use this as my damage baseline. So, hey, Chris in the past, why is this the damage baseline? You need to establish a baseline as to what's okay. If you can determine what's okay, then anything above it must be good, and anything below it must be not so good. So I personally thought about this for quite a bit, about what can I put as a baseline, something that I think does okay damage from level 1 right through level 20, so I can establish it as a baseline for which to judge damage by. And I thought about new players at that point. When I see a new player and I want to help them make a character, one of the first things I think of is the Warlock, because it is so easy to help somebody make a Warlock that's decent. All you have to do is you tell them, make sure that your beginning Charisma modifier is a +3. Take Hex and Eldritch Blast at first level. When you go into combat, you cast Hex first, and then you cast Eldritch Blast. Or if your Hex is already cast, you place your Hex first, and then cast Eldritch Blast. Then at second level, make sure that one of your invocations is Agonizing Blast. Then at 4th level and 8th level, you're going to increase your Charisma. And here's what it looks like on a graph. And so what we do is we start at 5.85 damage at level 1, and then it maxes out at 35.4 damage at level 17, right through level 20, it just stays the same. That's our 4th Eldritch Blast. So now, this is going to have to change, because we have a preview of the new Warlock, and the new Hex spell in the most recent playtest, and what do we know about it? Well, firstly, Eldritch Blast now scales with Warlock level instead of character level. That doesn't really affect the baseline though, because it was always a straight Warlock. Agonizing Blast is the same, still available at level 2. Ability scores have changed in now that we have a choice of which ability score to use, but that's not really going to affect the baseline either. Whatever score we use, it's still going to be +3, then +4, then +5. What's changed is the Hex spell. We all know it got a big old nerfing, where the extra damage can only be applied once per turn. We also know it's built right into the Warlock now, so you get the spell automatically, and that's really the designers kind of nudging us into using Hex. We can't upcast Hex with Mystic Arcanum, so that means we can cast this Hex with a 1st level slot at level 1, and then we can upcast it to a 3rd level slot when we reach level 9, and then a 5th level slot when we reach level 17, and that's the best we can do. So the question is, with Hex nerfed, and the slow rate of spell slot progression, limited upcasting, just how much does the damage baseline change using the playtest rules? I have seen some graphs already that suggest it hasn't changed as much as you would think, but I haven't seen the math used to make those graphs. So what I did is I did the math myself, and I'm going to go through it with you. We'll compare the old baseline to the new one, and I'm also going to draw some conclusions about once per turn damage when we're done and do a little experiment. So we're going to do the same routine here. The only real difference is Hex. So Eldritch Blast average damage per ray is 5.5. Hex average damage 3.5, and then it becomes 7, and then it becomes 10.5 as we upcast it to 3rd level and 5th level. And level 1 through level 4, our baseline doesn't change at all. Level 5 is the first point where things change versus 5th edition. We get 2 rays, but we can only apply Hex damage once. And I've already had conversations with players who figure that at level 5, Hex is delivering half the damage it used to. But that's not true. I mean, it is true if both attacks hit. But if you have 1 miss or 2 misses, there's no difference, right? So if you miss twice, Hex is delivering 0 extra damage regardless which version you're using. If you hit once, it's delivering 1d6 additional damage, regardless of which one you're using. Only if you hit twice does the old Hex do more. And here's how we can check the math. So we start with the attacks that don't include Hex. And this will cover levels 5 through 7, and a 60% chance to hit, times 9.5 average damage per ray, times 2 rays is 11.4. Then our crit damage is 0.55. Then what we do for Hex is we determine our chance of hitting at least once. So our chance to miss with each attack is 40%. So to figure out our chance to miss with both attacks, we multiply 40% by itself, and our chance to miss twice is 16%. So that means there is an 84% chance we can apply our hex damage. So it's 84% times 3.5 equals 2.94, and we still apply a 5% crit chance for 0.18. So we add the 11.4 and the 0.55 and the 2.94 and the 0.18, and we end up with 15.07. Then at level 8, we now have an increased ability score, whatever it happens to be, and so 60% times 10.5 times 2 is 12.6. Crit damage is still 0.55. Hex damage is still 3.12. So our total damage is 16.27. Then at level 9, things change. And level 9 and 10, our damage is going to be the same. But Hex is now going to deliver 2d6 damage because we can upcast it with a 3rd level slot. So we can just double the expected damage from Hex because our chance of applying it has not changed. So it now adds 6.24 damage, so that's 12.6 plus 0.55 plus 6.24, and now we're doing 19.39. So at level 9, as long as we upcast Hex to 3rd level, it actually out-damages the old version of Hex. 2d6 applied to any hit is simply superior to 1d6 added to each hit if we're attacking twice. We can think about it. If we miss with both attacks, both do 0 damage. If we hit with one attack, the old Hex delivers 1d6 damage and the new Hex delivers 2d6. And if we hit with both attacks, then they both deliver 2d6 damage. So the new Hex is either doing the same damage or more damage, depending how many times we hit. Then at level 11, we have another change. We now have 3 Eldritch Blasts, and this actually favors the old Hex, because now we can potentially add 3 times. So we could do 3d6 damage with the old Hex, while the new Hex only does 2d6. But which does more damage actually? We can determine that with math. 3d6 times 65%, because we add our crit damage, that is 6.83 we're getting from Hex in 5th edition. Of course, when we have 3 attacks, our chance of hitting at least once have gone up. So now we take 40% times 40% times 40%. And that means there is a 6% chance of us missing with all those attacks, or a 94% chance to hit at least once. And we still add 5% for crits. So 2d6, or 7 times 99%, is 6.93 versus 6.83 for the old Hex. It is really, really close. But technically, a 3rd level Hex does more damage on 3 Eldritch Blasts in the new rules than the old one does. And I've found that surprising. But let's move on to levels 11 through 16. Hex is doing 6.93, our base attacks are doing 18.9, our crits are doing 0.83, so our total is 26.66. And we're basically flat again against 5th edition right until we get to level 17. At level 17, 2 big things happen. We can cast Hex with a 5th level slot, so it's 3d6 on one hit, and we get a 4th Eldritch Blast. So base attack, 60% times 10.5 times 4. That's 25.2, crits are adding another 1.1, and our chance to hit at least once is 40% times 40% times 40% times 40% chance to miss, 3%, and that means we have a 97% chance to hit at least once. Plus we add 5% from crits, and this actually gives us a really unusual situation where we actually crit more often than we miss 4 times on a single turn. So our average damage is actually higher than 3d6 with the upcast Hex. So it's 1.02 times 10.5 equals 10.71. So 25.2 plus 1.1 plus 10.71, 37.01. And normally that would be the end. But now we really need to look at level 20. Our primary ability score goes up to 22. We get an epic boon feat. I may change this later on, but I just wanted to see what the damage boosting feat would do here. So I took Epic Boon of Irresistible Offense. The fancy bit here is whenever we roll a nat 20 for an attack roll, we add our casting ability score, not the modifier, the score itself, to the damage. Now I originally did the math wrong on this because I did 5% times 4 attacks times 22 equals 4.4, but you can only apply it once per turn, so actually what you have to do is determine your chance to crit at least once. That's 19%, times 22 is 4.18 for the epic boon damage. So if you're wondering how much that contributes to the overall damage, that's the amount. Then now we have a 65% chance to hit, and we're adding one more to damage. So it's 65% times 11.5 times 4 is 29.9, and crits add another 1.1. Then Hex now has a 98% chance of being applied, and 5% to crit, and so it's 1.03 times 10.5 is 10.82. So there's a good thing and a bad thing about adding this epic boon. The good thing is we end up with a nice round number of 46 DPR at level 20. The bad thing is, look how much damage the epic boon does compared to everything else. Like, Hex is delivering more than twice the damage of our epic boon. So yeah, in future iterations, that might go. But I was curious how effective it would be. For a Warlock, not all that great. Now, why did I go through all this math just to find out the damage graphs that I've seen are pretty much correct? Because I don't trust the math I haven't checked. People occasionally make mistakes, and if you don't see the math, you don't know. Speaking of math, I've carefully considered the statistical probability of breaking your key in a lock, and I've determined it's actually much higher if you're not subscribed to this channel. So if you aren't, you better take care of that right away. The math is done. This is all 100% accurate. So here is the graph of our old DPR and our new DPR. And yeah, they are very close. From levels 1 through 4, they're identical, and that's no surprise. And then at level 5, the old version does more than the new version, but the gap is much smaller than I would have thought. It's a little more than 1 DPR, so not very much. And then it basically switches places at 9th level, and now the new version is doing a little bit more than the old version. And then at 11th level, they basically are doing the same. The old version does 0.1 less than the new version, so just about the same, and that remains right to level 16. Then at level 17, the new version starts to build a bit of a gap. And then, of course, at level 20, we get the big gap. But yeah, that's what the new baseline looks like. So I walked away from this learning more than just that the damage baseline didn't change very much. Because after punching the math, it was really eye-opening to me. But first, let's talk about the Warlock. So the Warlock, we can see the baseline doesn't change very much. We can see that the new Warlock actually has a higher damage potential at most levels than the old Warlock does, which should be a surprise if you think that Hex got a massive nerf. But doing the same routine, Eldritch Blast plus Hex, the new Warlock outdamages the old Warlock 12 out of 20 levels, the same damage 4 out of 20 levels, and only delivers less damage in 4 out of 20 levels. But my big eye-opener here is I had no idea that the new Warlock was going to outdamage the old Warlock at 11th level. Now, it's not by very much, but I was certain the old Warlock would outdamage the new Warlock, and it's because of how I think about attacks. I tend to think about attacks as you do one attack, and you do X amount of damage, you do 2 attacks, and now it's X times 2, you do 3 attacks, and now it's X times 3. So the more attacks you get, it's just this linear progression of damage. And there are certain cases like Polar Master where an extra attack might deliver less damage because it does a D4 with your bonus action attack instead of the base weapon damage. But there's so many add-ons like the ability score bonus, the plus 10 from Great Weapon Master, and whatever else that I generally assume that that base weapon damage is pretty irrelevant. It's not insignificant, but it is a minority of your total damage. But once you start adding in all these features that do damage once per turn or once on your turn, it does really change that dynamic. Now, Rogues always had it that way, but Rogues never had extra attack. But you start adding those like once per turn big damage numbers on the Warlock, who's casting multiple Eldritch Blasts, and we can see that it has an impact. And then that gets me thinking, what about Barbarians? What about Fighters? What about Paladins? Because Smite is now once per turn. We have Frenzy on the Berserker Barbarian. That's once per turn. We have feats like Charger and Great Weapon Master. Those add damage once per turn. So lately we're just seeing more and more of this stuff where you add a big amount of damage once on your turn. We actually saw this earlier as well. In Tasha's we saw a little bit of this, but we see so much more of it now. And what it really got me thinking about when I saw how it affected the math is, how is that going to affect the math for weapon users? Because that's where I really think it's going to have a significant impact on how we think about optimizing weapon users. I just had a conversation with somebody, I'd say 2 days ago, where they said to me that, they said they are going to get rid of must-have feats in 1D&D, but if you're a melee character, Polar Master is still a must-have feat because that bonus action attack is so impactful. And I wonder, is that really the case? Because if Hex does more damage with 2d6 once on a hit than 3d6 once per attack, what does it mean for somebody like a Barbarian that is using Frenzy and gets this once per turn huge damage number? Because even if you attack only twice, you're almost certainly going to hit once, and then you add this huge amount of damage, and then you have this bonus action attack that doesn't get that extra damage. And so that seems like it should be a lower percentage of your overall damage. Also think about the weapon damage itself. Like 2d6 from a great sword, of course, is more than 1d6 from a short sword. But if we have these big damage numbers we can add once per turn, does that mean that that weapon damage isn't as important either? And so what I decided is to just take something that we know is true. So if you got a Barbarian, and they have a Halberd, and they have Great Weapon Master, and they have a Polar Master in 5th edition, you know that if you compare them to a Barbarian that's same level, that is using a weapon and a shield, and has access to no feats that actually add to their damage in any significant way, that one of those characters is going to completely overshadow the other one when it comes to delivering damage. Is that still the case in 1D&D? So I decided to do a little mathematical experiment. So first we'll take a trip to Obvious Town. So if we take a 5th edition 9th level Barbarian attacking with a 58% chance to hit with Reckless Attack, 5.5 base weapon damage, plus 3 rage damage, plus 3 strength damage, plus 10 Great Weapon Master damage, and they'll get bonus action attacks, but not on round 1 because they have to rage on round 1, but on round 2 and onwards, it's either going to be 2.5 base weapon damage plus 16 or 5.5 base weapon damage plus 16, depending on whether they're getting the bonus action attack from critting or dropping an enemy, or just the Polar Master standby. And I'm not going to overanalyze it. Here's the base attack damage. 58% times 21.5 times 2 is 24.94. Then 10% for crits times 5.5 times 2 is 1.1. So their damage on round 1 is 26.04. Then we'll just assume the lower damage for bonus actions. We really don't need the additional damage. 58% times 18.5 is 10.73. And then we have the 10% chance to crit times 2.5 is 0.25. So on round 2 onwards, they do 37.02. And if we take a look at an entire combat, well, let's assume 4 rounds, well, then they're doing 34.28 on average. Now let's look at our sword and board Barbarian. Shield and a longsword. Well, on the plus side, they can just focus on strength because there's not much in the way of a feat selection. So at level 4 and level 8, we'll increase their strength bonus for a chance to hit and the damage bonus. So we have 4.5 average damage, plus 5 from strength, plus 3 from rage, and that's 12.5 per attack. There's no bonus action attack, but we can reckless attack, and there's no minus 5 to hit from Great Weapon Master. So we have a 91% chance to hit, times 12.5 times 2 is 22.75, then 10% chance to crit, times 4.5 times 2 is 0.9, 23.65 damage. So if we compare 34.28 to 23.65, it's dramatic, a 45% increase in damage. And this is considering that their strengths are 16 and 20. Once the Halberd Barbarian catches up in strength, that percentage is going to go up. Now let's look at the playtest. So this time let's give our Barbarian a pike with push attack. Push attack might be useful, but it's not impacting damage. So we'll give our shield using Barbarian a weapon mastery that also doesn't increase damage. We'll take a Morningstar for sap. So we will start with our pike user with Great Weapon Master and Polar Master. We have 5.5 base damage, 4 from strength, 3 from rage, that's 12.5. Let's also assume we can rage before round 1 because we have the better duration, so the bonus action attack is a d4 plus 7 or 9.5. And here's the math. It's 84% times 12.5 times 2 is 21, 10% chance of a crit times 5.5 times 2 for 1.1, 84% chance of our bonus action attack hitting times 9.5 is 7.98. 10% chance of our bonus action attack critting, 0.25. Then Frenzy. How often are we going to add Frenzy? Well, when I work out the percentage, it is rounding up to 100%. So it's over 99.5%. So I'm using 100%, 10.5 damage. Great Weapon Master, same thing. Automatically going to be applied for 3 damage. And we get a total damage of 43.83. It's pretty good damage. Now, if we are looking at the Morningstar and Shield, obviously we're expecting the damage to be lower. The question is, how much lower? Well, we have a couple feats to select. We'll grab Charger for that D8 damage once per turn. And there's no other real damage boosting level 4 feats, so let's increase our strength to 20. Oh, and at level 1, we actually have a feat that's an okay boost to damage, so we'll pick up Fighting Style Dueling with our background feat. So our base damage is 4.5, plus 5 from Strength, plus 3 from Rage, plus 2 from Dueling. So it's 88% chance to hit, times 14.5 times 2 is 25.52. 10% chance to crit, times 4.5 times 2 is 0.9. Frenzy does not add 100% of the time, it rounds off to 99% of the time for 10.4. This is important, okay? This number right here is important. The 2 attacks means we add Frenzy 99% of the time. The 3 attacks means we add Frenzy 100% of the time. So the actual damage that Frenzy adds is pretty much the same, no matter how many additional attacks we're adding after that. Now, Charge is 4.5 average damage, and I used 50% on my previous calculations in my Barbarian video and my Fighter video, and I was told that that was too low. So I'll use 75%. I don't think it makes a big difference either way, but that's 3.38. So the average damage of our Morningstar using Barbarian wearing a shield is 40.2. So we have 43.83 with the Pike versus 40.2 with Morningstar and Shield. So what we're seeing here is a 9% increase to damage from going from a Shield and a Morningstar to going to a Pike, Great Weapon Master, and Polearm Master. That's not very much. But one thing that does skew the numbers a bit is I increased the strength to 20 for the Morningstar using Barbarian because I figured they didn't really have another feat to take. But they do have other feats to take. There's lots of cool feats they might take. They might take Shield Master. They might take Mage Slayer. They might take Medium Armor Master. None of those increase your damage, but that doesn't mean you're not going to take them. And you still increase your strength in the long run doing it that way. So that's probably the way I would end up going anyways. So I figured I'd better do these calculations again, assuming that the Barbarian using the Morningstar has the same strength as the Pike using Barbarian. Then now we have an 84% chance to hit, so it's the same chance times 13.5 times 2 is 22.68. 10% chance to crit times 4.5 times 2 is 0.9. And our Frenzy, we now have a 97% chance to apply it, which still leaves us with 10.19. So even with the lower strength, the chance that we're applying Frenzy is still really close to 100%. And then the Charge for 3.38, and our DPR is 37.15. So what that means is, when we take the Pike, and we give up the Shield, and we give up the cool feat that does something else, we manage to get 18% increase to damage. And what does that tell us? Well, first of all, it should tell you that Berserker is a really strong subclass now. But it also tells us that once per turn damage bonuses mean those additional attacks add less and less than we are used to. We knew the Pike would do more damage than the Morningstar, as well it should. But Weapon and Shield actually looks pretty viable here, and that is unheard of. We haven't seen that since 2nd edition. Is that damage bonus worth the 2 armor class difference? Maybe, but it's definitely not a given. So no, I don't think that Polearm Master is a must-have feat for melee builds anymore. And I don't think that polearms and hand crossbows are must-have weapons for weapon users anymore. It really depends on where your damage is coming from. And when you put that big once-per-turn damage bonus, like Frenzy, on a character that is almost certain to add it every round, giving him one more attack isn't adding what it used to. And I did wonder, I thought, if I am doing 3 attacks, I have a better chance of adding Frenzy than if I'm making 2 attacks. So it does add more damage, but it was very, very little. Like, it was doing 10.5 damage on the 3 attack Barbarian, and the 2 attack Barbarian, it was doing 10.19 damage. That's hardly any difference at all. Now, this is a specialized look, right? We're looking at somebody who has reckless attack, so they have an advantage on their attacks. That's going to make a difference. And definitely, that once per turn big damage that we're getting through Frenzy is making a massive difference on this comparison. So we might see something different if we were to compare, say, a fighter, comparing these two fighting styles. But what it does show us is how once per turn damage changes how we need to think about damage in the game. Because if you are making a barbarian and you're thinking you have to take a polearm and polearm master and great weapon master to deliver decent damage, well, there's the math. That's not true. You will do the most damage if you go that route, but the difference isn't as big as it has been in the past. And in fact, the difference has shrunk a lot. And so it's really a matter of priority. Do you want to squeak every point of damage you can, or do you want some other things like the higher armor class? And it's going to be a matter of preference. And that's great because I really like the idea that I can play a shield and weapon using character or a two-handed weapon character, and I'm going to do a little bit more damage with one, and I'm going to have a little bit better defense with the other, but it's not so much of a difference that I feel like I have to choose one over the other. Now, I have heard some feedback from people in the past already that don't like once per turn damage features, and the reason is because they don't like the whole idea that their attacks don't all do the same damage, and when they're playing, now they have to decide when to add it, and it's an extra step that they didn't have to do before. And I get all that. I'm just going to say that there is an upside here. If you want a game where more weapon styles have merit, this does help achieve that. And once per turn smites will be the same thing. Anyways, that's just some of what I thought were interesting observations on how damage needs to be looked at differently in 1D&D. And I hope you found it as interesting as I did. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.